What up? Wade here. Welcome back to the Wade Alter Show. So today I got another great friend, another special guest, awesome copywriter. His name is Mikhail. I can't do the Russian Kuznetsov. That's with my Russian accent here. He lives in LA and he's got an awesome pedigree. Super world-class copywriter. Worked with Tai Lopez for I think 4 or 5 years as he was kind of building that brand and launching it to get it to where it is today. And then also works for a company called Real Social Dynamics now as the CMO. I forgot where they were at when he came on board a few years ago, but helped scale that to $1 million a month company and do all the different product launches, all the copy assets, and just the funnel structures and all that sort of stuff. And so he lives here in LA. I was like, man, let's jump on a call and just go as advanced possible as we can for copywriting principles and just see if people enjoy this, see where this goes, nerd out on it. We both have some sort of a OCD complex, which I think is beneficial when it comes to copywriting. And so sit back, relax. We're going to get into some really cool advanced concepts related to copywriting, marketing, human psychology, persuasion, and how to, looking at it on a meta level as well as a super granular level. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Sit back, relax, and as always, enjoy. All right, Mikhail, thanks for coming along.
Hey, happy to be here, brother.
Sweet. So I guess to start, I've known of you for a few years. I don't know how long you've known of my brand and everything. I'd love to kind of, for the people out there that don't know who you are, maybe give a little bit of kind of where you came from, some of your pedigree, things like that.
Yeah, totally. So I'll do the 30-second origin story because I think that's kind of like mandatory. The first date intro of explain your whole life here. Born in Russia, came here when I was 8. My mom tricked me. She said I was going on an adventure, ended up in the US, and never saw my friends ever again. So that was fun. We can kind of go on the tangent a little bit later.
I was going to say, we could talk at the inner game of that shit. Yeah.
Exactly. So I figured that would be kind of amusing. And then, East Coast, West Coast, that kind of stuff, New York, San Diego. And I guess as it relates to, clear specifics for the audience involved here, worked with Tai Lopez for 3.5 years on his back-end marketing, his back-end CRM, managed his tech team, helped him, architect his back-end funnels. I mean, you can't really name a thing in that organization that I didn't have some involvement in some capacity. And obviously that's pretty impactful. And then went on to work with a bunch of YouTubers because I don't know how well versed the audience is on traffic, but with Tai, we found that we had to do a lot of paid traffic. And one thing I found that was fascinating was with YouTube, you can do organic traffic and make as much, if not more money just by releasing these cool videos. So I wanted to really figure out how do people do that where they just put a video out and they make hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. And so kind of got into that whole YouTube community. I just had a friend of mine over. He's got 5.5 million subs. We were just filming with him. That's the guy, I sent you a video with him and did that for about a year. That was really cool. I figured that model out pretty quickly and then went on to work with Real Social Dynamics and came on as the chief marketing officer of RSD. And I've been doing that for over 3 years now, 3 years and some months. So pretty exciting. I do most of the copy for the instructors there. We're a $1 million a month company. So I say that kind of softly, but it's actually pretty cool and pretty fun. It's a unique brand, unique mission. So that's kind of my spiel, internet marketing, copywriting, biohacking, neuropsychology, the usual spiel.
Yeah. We'll see if we get into some of that stuff too.
Sure.
So where would you say your background from a copywriting perspective, how do you get into that?
So what we had was basically when I was working with Tai, we had all these clients that wanted to do this cold traffic stuff. And I realized, okay, well, that's all built, at the time, it was built around the sales letter, right? The VSL style. So you're talking, white screen background and then just words, basically, words and a voice. And I started to play around with fulfilling some of those clients that, he couldn't fulfill. And that ended up including a lot of the top ClickBank VSLs by the time that I was done with it. So, you flush this thing out, it ends up being 25,000 words. You whittle it down to 8 to 12,000. You get something that's decent. Then you pop it on there, and now you're looking at things like pacing. You're looking at word placement, and how you separate the lines. It's very conducive to my OCD nature. I'm very, very OCD, and it was very conducive to that. So that was kind of where I guess you could say I sharpened the sword. Was that the sales page had to be pristine. The VSL had to be, it had to support, hundreds of thousands of dollars per month in ad spend, if not, tens of thousands per day in ad spend. So that's a pretty hefty and lofty thing when somebody puts that behind you, right? That's a lot of weight to get put behind something that, you wrote late into the night. But, if we're talking references, we're talking obviously Dan Kennedy, John Carlton, everything Ogilvy that I could find, boron letters. I mean, you name it, all of that old school stuff. And then kind of built it up from there progressively into a video format. So where that evolved, what I thought was really cool was as soon as kind of the floodgates opened from going words on a page without a face to being able to put a face behind it, that really opened the floodgates because now you have certain mannerisms that you can get across, certain personal connection with eye contact, things like that I didn't have at my disposal when I got to Converse. So now it's kind of like a supercharger, if you will, on that.
Cool. So what do you say? I got all sorts of questions I could ask about this. Let's do a deep dive into copy to start here.
Sure.
What would you say are some of the biggest paradigm shifts that you hit? Because for me, definitely, I feel here's how I kind of view my own kind of skill set with the copywriting. First is you suck, and then you get good, but you're like really, really, really slow. And then I feel like I got really fast, but then all of a sudden it's like you hit the next level. And for me, what it was a lot of was specificity. Like I feel like you can tell the novice writers more like change your life forever versus the whole like imagine what it's going to be like when you get home and you see that text message on your phone and you're like, oh my God, it's from that girl that you totally love and how that'll feel and your friends. And so specificity was a big one for me. And that's when I see a lot of people make mistakes with. I'm just wondering if you kind of had any of those, all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I just cracked a code. I just hit a whole new level here. And if there's anything, or if you're mentoring someone, any of those sort of things that you've noticed?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I mentor a ton of people, staff and non-staff on this. And for myself personally, I had similar phases. I had, a period of several months of seeing nothing but these slides and these long, sales letters and looking at metrics like that. That's basically, what sharpens the sword is you look at it and you go, and this is not converting, man. It's not converting. Okay, why is it not converting? And I'll kind of go through a few different things. So you start right and you start to figure out what it is, and you realize, okay, well, I can write a headline, and then you can write some other stuff, but you don't really know. You're kind of running can openers in a way, right? When it comes to that, and I think of this actually as a parallel to art, very much so. So once you get good enough at guitar, for example, you don't no longer have to think about being in a certain key or how your hand fits to hit a certain chord shape. It just kind of happens, and that's the level that I got to. But I think as far as getting to there, so the first phase is always methodical, trying to do it yourself, right? So you go, okay, well, I got to write a hook here. Okay, how do I write this hook? And you read it and it doesn't quite hit home, right? And or let's say a subheadline or a list of bullets. And then you start realizing that there's methodologies and processes for every single element that's on the top pages. So the real aha moment, at least the first biggest aha moment, and I had a couple, but the biggest one was when I realized that there was a modular framework for every single mechanism of copy. So take a benefit stack, right? A benefit stack has a specific set of rules that I follow, and I started to observe what other people are doing. Copywriting, the first four letters of that are COPY. Copywriting, you want to go in and you actually want to copy what the best people are doing outside of, legal concerns. That is how you're actually supposed to do it. It's not, there's not anything out of integrity about that. You're not supposed to swipe it one for one. And I have a whole process with how I do that, where I color code exact swipe, and then I adjust it, and then I recolor code it. And the way that looks, I import it. If it's a direct swipe, it's orange. Anything I write is red. Once I've done an edit pass, it becomes blue. And once I finalize, it becomes black. So I found like that process was a huge stepping stone for me, where I could see if something is in black, I don't ever have to look at it again. If I want to maybe shuffle it around, I can do that, but I don't have to touch it ever again. So that was a big one. And then kind of going and digging in and going, okay, well, the personal journey story, what's the thing that makes that work? Relatability. Okay, what's the core atomic component of what makes this element work? For example, this is for you thing. Well, that's a three-way dimensionalization on a low, middle, high, for example, beginner, intermediate, advanced, etc. Right? So there's always a core component of every single modular thing. And then seeing how those things piece together in proven field-tested ways really allowed me to kind of start playing with it. And it took me about 1.5 years before I got to that point. It was just 1.5 years of just utter pain and frustration and trying to figure out why things weren't converting. But there was that moment. So the copying moment, I think, was a huge one. Just copying what people are doing. 2 is breaking it down to understanding what is the purpose of this section. And then breaking that down to what makes that purpose work, right? Kind of like what I mentioned. That was absolutely huge. That was absolutely phenomenal. And it's very much a way of thinking and observing more than it is an actual technique. It's kind of like linked to your RAS on what are you actually paying attention for and what's catching you. And then I had a really fascinating moment where I started to see copy everywhere. Like I'd walk down the street, I'm like, the tree is copy. It's trying to sell me on nature and how beautiful it is, right? So that kind of gets into like psychology and understanding human needs and desires. And once you kind of like start linking all these pieces together, it becomes this really intricate painting. I think of it as like painting or art now at this point, where once you understand what the shapes and the colors are that work for the human mind, I think you have to dissect the human mind first. And we can definitely touch on psych here, or neural manipulation or NLP, what have you. We got a bunch of different things that we can touch on. But those are the big aha moments. Number one is I could just copy what the best people are doing, tweak it. Number two was there's a purpose for this copy, figure out what makes that purpose work, what's the atomic element, and then learning to kind of piece those together in proven field tested ways. So
sweet. Love it. Yeah, I guess one thing I definitely think, it's so obvious when you're already doing it, but I feel like people don't realize this or somehow gets lost in the weeds. The aspect of having a sales copy crib of some sort. I'd be wonder what your process is for, like for me, it's basically like if I see a sales page I like, probably do a screenshot, but I'll probably save the HTML as well, just to kind of have that in a separate thing. The amount of money I spend on rev.com to do transcriptions of emails and videos and shit. I used to do it myself, which I actually think it's probably your copy actually. Like I've transcribed the entire 67-step copy, which is like 2 hours long. And I love how it's like the pitch starts 30 minutes in and then it's just like reinforce. And so that was actually a big shift for me because usually I'm just like, by the time I get to the offer, I'm like, all right, we're done. Because for me, so much of the story and the angle part of it, Actually, I'd love to hear this like kind of selfishly because you did write that copy, right?
I assisted on it. I didn't write the whole thing. Tai actually is a phenomenal copywriter. Tai doesn't quite get the credit he deserves because of all the flish and flash. We were working on a lot of modular components of that. But go ahead and ask a question. I'll see if I was actually involved with that.
I was going to say, well, so here's like my view. So my process is usually starting at the top, and of course, a lot of times they say 90% is the headline or the angle. And so I'm constantly starting at the top and then I go a little bit further. Start at the top again, go a little bit further. And I just literally continued at the top and kind of like the Joe Sugarman slippery slide kind of process. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I feel like by the time I get to the introduction of the product, I'm like, all right, cool. The product's here, just put the fucking bullets in. And then it's like, all right, offer, guarantee, stuff like that. But like I said, from the 67 steps, then I'm like, man, that's just like literally where you can get started sometimes, I feel. And I think that's also because it's like the colder the traffic. A lot of my stuff is more warm traffic. So you don't need that sort of, for the price of a sushi dinner, or like for the price of a pair of sneakers, and like some of the positions.
You can get a Lamborghini. How?
So I guess like I said, and I think I need to change this mindset of like, once I get to the offer, I'm almost like, my work is done here. So what is your view of like offer past that point, looking at the guarantee and stuff? Do you have a sort of, you talked about the different areas and the purpose of those different aspects. Yeah, just what are your thoughts on that?
Totally. So I'll say that's actually the easier question. I'm gonna kind of go another level deeper automatically because it's gonna lend itself organically to build this back up. I call it salivation. Okay, like if you've ever been so hungry, if you've been like on a 12-hour flight or something, and then you touch down and you're so like you just want to get a decent meal, or you want your head to hit a normal pillow. If you've ever been in any of those states of mind, I actually always start with that now. I used to kind of start with a more methodical approach, and I'll break that down. I have a whole modular system that I've actually built. It's a whole separate discussion, but I start with the irresistibility of the offer. Is how irresistible is this thing that I'm actually pitching? And what is the core mechanism? And it's a very critical word. I think a lot of people forget or don't even understand what that means. And so I'll try and break it down. So number one is, what is the irresistible offer? And how irresistible is that offer really? Is this something you would jump over a chain link fence with barbed wire for? If the answer is no, you got to go back to your offer, because no matter what magic you do in your copy, you can do wizardry with copy. You can sell, like sell me this pen kind of thing, right? You can do that, but that's not where it shines. That's not where it shines at all. Where it shines is when you get it to where the offer is so good that in itself it becomes the engine and the driving force for the copy. And then you break that necessity down into a mechanism that works. And what I mean by mechanism Because I think of it just like a watch. So rather than thinking, okay, well, and again, this will kind of tie up to your question, but I think it's important to see how the pieces connect, because if that offer is irresistible, and you've got a check mark there, you go, this is something people want, need, and desire, and are willing to smash through a wall for. Awesome. Now all you got to do is relay that, and you've already done 80% of the work from my vantage point. From there is just understanding how to break that down into a mechanism. So I'll give you an example with one of Owen's launches, actually one of RZ Tyler's launches. Those of you guys that are familiar, this was, I think, Hot Seat at Home, the original one we did, or might have been Hot Seat Transformational Experience about 3 years ago. So here's an example of a mechanism. It's plant the seed, create a catalyst, establish an upward spiral, and prevent paradigm reversion. Okay, so that was plant the seed, catalyze the seed, create an upward spiral, and then lock them in place there. And that's a visualization component that neither one of those, the seed thing, you can, either one could be a module in itself now. So you've actually architected its own module. As an artist, you've created something out of thin air in a way, but also it works very well together. And that's what I mean by mechanism. Like, that's what made that launch work, in addition to a lot of other things. But that's what made the concept of what the product does understandable from a visual component. Oh, I have the seed inside of me already. I just need it to be activated. I need to move upwards and make sure I don't slip. I can understand that. It's kind of like you're climbing a mountain, right? You don't want to slip back down. There's a lot of visual components. So I always start with the irresistibility of something that people have. And then I break that down into what is the mechanism of this launch or the sales page or this concept that's going to work. I see, a lot of my competitors at the time, they were doing these really cheesy VSLs. And I would ask, like, why are you using this? I'm like, oh, well, it's like a gimmick. I'm like, that's great, but that doesn't really resonate. It doesn't make me visualize. It intrigues me, right? There's like the hook of intrigue. And I think that's awesome. I think that's great. But I think now we're moving into a much more human space with marketing, where it's all about the human element, and humans relate well to technology. So this is something that kind of goes very macro, is our relationship with technology is actually very positive, right? Like right now we're having this conversation. We couldn't have that without technology. And technology is built on certain mechanisms, right? There's a reason about the wheel, and then eventually a car, and then an airplane. We are prone to developing mechanisms in our lives as a species. So copy should be no different. You should be asking that. Now to kind of build that all the way back up, offer follow-up. Well, if you've done the work and you've created the relatability, you've created utmost clarity of what they're getting, you've swung that pendulum back and forth, right? Because copy entirely is just a pendulum of emotion versus logic the entire time. It's always emotion versus logic, emotion versus logic. If for the listeners, if you're writing a piece of copy and it doesn't do one of three things: one is trigger emotion, two is actually tone down the emotion and trigger logic, or three, move the story along very quickly, get rid of it. Just completely get rid of it. If it doesn't do one of those three things, just get rid of it. Again, number one, trigger an emotional reaction. Number two, explain a logical principle or component. Or number three is move the story along viscerally at lightning fast speed, get rid of it. So if you've done it that well up until the point of the presentation of the offer, I always ask myself, well, where are they? Because what usually happens is, what any sequence you want to take, let's say you took the sequence of having, personal journey, then how that related to the product, so product journey, and then you went into some benefits, and then you related that to a story about somebody else who seemed unrelated until a critical other juncture. Then you added some benefits that were secondary, and you built all this up to this great value stack of all these things that through this epic quest for 15 years, you put together into this amazing thing that you're now going to present to them. Well, there's a very valid question of, when you present that thing, are they in a state of heightened emotion or are they logical? Because you could do this epic journey thing and then they're psyched up. They don't know what the thing is yet. They're psyched up. But there's other ways to do it. They're saying, listen, on warm traffic especially, right? You already like our stuff. Here's the deal. Here's what I got. Crystal clear. Here's what it is. Here's how much it costs. Boom. So now you've pushed them all the way into logic. Where I start from is, at the point of the offer, which side of the pendulum are they in? Are they in the middle? Where have I guided them to? And then I structure the follow-up off of that. So, the most common follow-up is you just hammer social proof, hammer testimonials, hammer guarantees. And that stuff's great, but you got to understand what it's doing. Guarantee, logic. Guarantee, logic, right? Guarantee is not going to trigger me emotionally. It's justifying the logical and intellectual components I need in order to be able to make a decision. I have a great phrase in my copywriting course. It's like, you cannot elicit an action off of logic. It is impossible. It is, and you would know this, as well as anybody, right? Given the space that we're in, it's simply not possible. You cannot elicit an action off of logic, but you can elicit it off of emotion. So that means if you're eliciting action, you can't be talking about logical components. So you got to find ways to weave those logical components in, and then do things like I call them a battle speech, where I'll actually swipe like MLK or JFK, and I'll just straight swipe it. I'll rearrange the words, and I will take us to war, man. We will conquer their kingdoms, and it literally gets to a point where by the third or fourth phrase, it makes no logical sense. Especially on video, it comes off really good because it doesn't make any logical sense. But it's like that Braveheart speech, right? You're just so pumped up. You're just like, man, like let's charge this thing. Yeah, like you don't even know what the person's talking about, but you're so excited. So you can do a lot of follow-up, but that's kind of where I build the distance of the follow-up from. Is like, okay, well, where am I ending up? And then how much more do I need to do here? Do I need to keep punching this? Longer is always better. We could go forever on this podcast, and I think people will enjoy it. But there's also kind of the Tim Ferriss approach of like, kind of MVPing as well. So I try and do both.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely want to hit on, it's something I don't hear often, but I feel the way that I got really good actually was somebody who was very successful as a copywriter. And I had my sales letter and just peering over the shoulder sort of thing. And he really didn't change anything like wordsmithing sort of stuff. It was just like, that paragraph, gone. That paragraph, like you said, the lightning speed of the moving the story forward, that's definitely something I intuitively do. It's not something I've said a lot before. So I really like that you highlighted that, because I think there's so many ways to tell the story, right? And you're trying to think, how do I tell the story and position it to build rapport so they can see themselves going through the same journey and things like that. But it's like, can you really take these 3 paragraphs and put it into a sentence? And usually the answer is yes, if you're elegant enough. It's just like, how do I really do that sort of stuff, So, and I also love what you talked about, the emotion versus the logical. One of the more recent things that I've realized, I don't know, you talked about NLP. So I think I was talking last time we were together. So I worked with this NLP hypnotherapist for like 3 years. And one of the sort of meta strategies that everyone falls into is moving towards or moving away. It's a classic thing Tony Robbins talks about too. And I'm like extreme moving towards sort of person. I'd hazard to guess you're a moving away person from the little bit I've known you. And Owen as well. And, I think we have a lot of mutual friends that are more like moving away. But I've noticed that like, I don't do a lot of that in my copy. So it's something that I actually have to pay attention to, like, hey, I need to balance these things. Is that something you're even pay attention to or aware of, or that just kind of happens organically, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, we're talking, qualification, disqualification a bit here, right? So yeah, you do it. So one thing you mentioned was the editing. Let me just touch on that really briefly, because I think it's fascinating. I actually don't even consider that I write copy anymore. I'm a copy editor. I just edit now. And I'll force people to write tens of thousands of words and then I'll edit them. And I actually really enjoy that a lot more. So if you're someone who is maybe listening to this and you're having a hard time with copy, actually go to a random sales page and take it, swipe it, color code it, and then rewrite it. And actually go and rewrite it for your existing offer. So you're going to want to change words, you're going to want to change sentence structure, but you're going to want to keep the general skeleton of it as it is. So there's that. Now, the moving towards, moving away part, I just think of this as, what is the sharpest sword that I can use without hurting myself? That's kind of the philosophy that I use there. It's like, what is the most aggressive approach that I can possibly take, as aggressive as possible, before the slingshot comes back towards me? I don't know if that makes sense. But that's about what we do. I would say Owen is more on the soft side of that for sure. But he's also he's good at being very inclusive, actually, in certain ways. So it's a bit of an odd dichotomy where, I mean, we're talking like push-pull now. We're getting like game concepts. I don't know if we want to go there. So we can.
It happens. We get there. Like with Mitch, like the whole podcast was like, he'd take a copy principle and then I'd like apply it to pick up, and we like go back and forth and stuff like that, man. But I like that. I mean, I think that's actually I'm interested to hear, since we're just in this topic, like related to being polarizing, as well, and being willing to push people away is, I think, kind of an area you're hinting at here, which I think is another thing that people lead to being afraid and really being able to connect with the right type of people and turning people down as well,
Yeah. So there's kind of two categories. One is going to be people that are writing their own copy. And that's a lot easier, right? If you're writing your own copy, you kind of know what your limit is. And I would urge a challenge for everyone listening to test that limit. To see where that actual point of blowback is going to be a lot further out than you expect. You can say some pretty outrageous things and make some really outrageous claims. No one's looking. There's no like copy police really. You could argue that, I guess, with certain regulatory agencies, but that's within Facebook, Google Ads. But as far as what you could get away from, like how
at some point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like how aggressively. Where it gets a little bit more blurry though is if you're writing copy for clients, right? Because let's say you're a copywriter, you have just a couple clients, or maybe 20, 30, 40 clients. Well, you've got this thing called quote unquote voice that you have to deal with, and there's definitely methodologies for dealing with that. But as it comes to qualification, disqualification, or being aggressive, there's a comfort zone level there. And the problem there is, if you're the rock star, right? It's like this common thing. Like if you're the rock star on stage with the guitar, well, you've got a heightened ability to moderate risk, right? You've got a heightened sensitivity to risk. You're used to it. You're used to the thousands of fans. So if you're writing this really aggressive copy, you might be used to it, but you have to keep in mind that your client might not be used to it and their audience might not be used to it. So there's a whole priming mechanism. Like I think copywriters talk a lot about priming the audience, right? Prime the audience. Like that's great. But what about priming your clients? And nobody, I've very rarely seen that talked about where, well, if your clients understood that they can be 15%, 20% edgier, and that would get them twice as many sales, but they're stuck in their comfort zone. Another wide ranging topic. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with writing something and then going, two forms of criticism? The external critic of the client says, I don't like it. And then you kind of have that conversation with yourself. Well, I know this will convert. This is proven. But because the client doesn't like it, now I kind of don't like it. And so it's actually affecting your internal mental state and your ability to execute, right? You can't be like a Navy SEAL, but then, the next day go to like the kindergarten. And then it's always weird. It's called PTSD, right? It screws you up. So I don't know if that kind of hits the nail on the head. I know I'm doing a lot of like macro concepts here for you guys.
I had a question about one of that aspect specifically. But yeah, it reminds me, for me, I feel it doesn't happen every time, but I know I've hit the head with a headline if I laugh out loud.
Yes.
All of a sudden I see it, I'm like, and I'm like, yep, that's a winner, right? Because it's like, you just know it's a good, like, I can't believe that just came out of my head or something like that, right? So I just wanted to throw that in there. But yeah, I think there's definitely people out there, when you say aggressive copy, they probably don't know what you mean by that. So if you could get more granular or specific with that.
I mean, total look, if you're listening, you're going to fucking die. You're going to die if you're listening to this fucking podcast at some point. And it might be tomorrow. It might be a year from now. It might be in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I pray to God that you live a long and fruitful life. But you know what? That's not guaranteed. That's not fucking guaranteed at all. So the reality of the situation is the only moment you have is right now. And yet you have all of these self-doubts and things in your head going on that are ruining this moment for you. And the only way you're going to clear that so that you can have a life full of purpose is XYZ, right? So taking little angles like that, right? That's a short, super, super common example. I call it POD, point of death example. You can go much edgier. You can use, I prefer to not use any sort of religious or racial references. I feel that that's just below the belt. Again, as an artist, is akin to like taking a hammer and smashing something that's really beautiful. I'm not a fan of that. But when it comes to, edgy, aggressive copy, it's cut through this nonsense. Like, how many Instagram posts get posted daily? How many Facebook posts get posted daily? How many YouTube videos or minutes of YouTube videos come out daily? Like, give me something I can feel. I tell this to my copywriters all the time. Give me something that resonates. Give me something I can feel in my chest. Hit me with this thing. And you could see it on their face when he started. Like, my intern started, they're scared. They're terrified. Right? It's like the Fight Club quote. Like that's why Fight Club's such a great movie, right? It's like yes, please, like, do some jujitsu, get punched, bleed, experience an emotion, rather than sitting in this sensitized world where everything's convenient, everything's delivered. We don't have to hunt for our own food, and yet people complain all the time because they're hyper offended about whatever bullshit. It's like, that's utter nonsense. And there's a question. I mean, do you want to be mediocre? If you want to be mediocre, do whatever you want. Go watch your TV show and stop listening to this. But if you want to be excellent, if you want to excel and dominate your own life, Don't do it for me. Do it for yourself. You have to be able to sharpen your sword and know you've got a sharp sword. And guess what? You got to go out there and get what you want to get out of life with it. And that means you got to cut some shit up. You got to cut life up, dude. You got to fucking tackle it, charge it dead on. And I think people are genuinely too scared to do that because we're so desensitized. Like I'm sitting here in my beautiful apartment. I get everything delivered to my door. I could not leave ever, I think, if I didn't want to. I literally have everything 100% delivered. And so what's the biological pressure for me? Like, what's the biological pressure for me to even do this podcast? There's none. I don't even have to do it, right? So it's like, what do you have to do to yourself psychologically to psych yourself up to go do some shit? I'm going to do a 16-hour day today, man. I'm not breaking a sweat, dude. I got alkaline water, man. I love this thing. I love this. I live for this. But I think the average person is genuinely confused, and the state is confusion, perplexion, that then hovers into comfort. So it's like comfort. I know I should be doing something. I'm confused about what I should be doing. Try something, fail, back into comfort. And I think the scariest thing is on this planet right now, if you were to count how many people are stuck in that state, and then to picture the world we could have if they were broken out of that state. Like a good example is Evan Carmichael, right? He's like, I tackle the number one biggest problem, and that's unrealized human potential. And that's something that resonates. That's something, and believe it or not, that is actually in a way edgy copy. That's a great headline. Most people would say, well, how is that edgy? Well, because you're going to die. And when you die, you're going to look at your life and you're going to realize you didn't do a whole bunch of shit you could have done. And there's no chance. That's it. You're fucked. You can't do it now. You're dead. Goodbye. It's over. And that's such a, that in itself is an edgy topic, right? Because it's kind of scary to think about. I think death freaks us out, and it's a whole separate tangent there. But that's an example of what edgy copy feels like. Like even as I say that, you get a little anxious. Like a part of you should want to actually shut off this podcast and go boxing or go punch something or go jump off. Like more power to put it on pause, come back to it. But yeah, go jump out of a fucking airplane. Like what's that thing that you've always wanted to do? You could just go straight to being. Just go do that thing. Just do it tomorrow. Like there's nothing really stopping you. There's no medical life police that said you lived a life that's too good. I think I myself had this because I grew up with a Russian family, and it's very much like conserve your money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized like when I was like 15, 16, like there's no life police. You can go do crazy shit. Like you could just go do crazy shit, and there's really no life police. Like there's the police, but like they're not really paying attention anyway. So that should be an exciting moment for the listeners, is realizing there is no life police. There's no guy who's going to wave their finger at you and say, you lived today, bad Johnny. How dare you go and snowboard? How dare you go jump off an airplane? How dare you go get that beautiful girl that you wanted to get? How dare you, bad Johnny? That doesn't exist. I think in our minds, in the back of our minds, we think that exists. But as soon as you start to completely erase that and start to test those boundaries, that's where you get into quote unquote edgy copy, because again, it's outside of the norm. So that's my little rant on that.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I love it. Because I think the thing too, and you basically said this, but I want to clarify it for guys listening, is that that's the state that your customer's at too, or potential customer, is like they're walking in the days, they're just sludging through life. I think back to like the pickup days and stuff. It's like they're kind of like whatever they hear online, they're just testing it with like Sarah at work. And what happens is like, especially if you're writing it for yourself as the expert, you're so many paradigms above, and you're that 1% of the 1% of the 1% that actually took action. And so you have to kind of grab them by the throat and be like, hey, like you need to do this. Like, and so I think again, like you said, it's almost like people, and again, this is like the NLP, where you see them and you kind of mind read your own, or you put your sort of worldview on top of theirs and say, well, like, this is what I need to do. And I feel it's constantly trying to take myself out of that sort of biased approach and be like, well, how can I truly meet them where they're at?
I use Actor's Method religiously for this exercise of, here's the thing, if you're listening to this podcast, you're not stupid. Like by default, if you're listening to this right now, you are not stupid. Congratulations. And that sounds really kind of arrogant, right, in a way to say, but you have to understand the average person is actually stupid. The average is average for a reason, right? It's because their brain doesn't work so well. They can only get that little 9. That's all they can do. That's all they got. That's all they can do for themselves. And to put yourself there is very difficult when your brain works, because it's proven time and time again that you know
when you're not drinking the alkaline water and your brain's perfectly fluid.
Totally. No, I mean, it's you can't experience something that you're not experiencing, right? That's called it's called self-deception, however you want to describe it. So on that specific topic, I use Actor's method a lot actually before I write copy for say a fitness niche of being overweight, of being obese. Well, I will actually go and walk around the city, and I will, with every fiber of my being, pretend that I'm fat. I'll pretend I'm obese. I'll put on a podcast for people with that demographic, and I will listen to the thoughts and ideas that they're listening to, right? I will try and figure out, okay, well, what's the experience that they're having from a logical standpoint so that I can convince my mind. I create a little subsegment in my mind that says, okay, for that, little action there for this project, I'm going to go into this room and I'm going to be a fat person here. And the first thing you realize is you're stuck, like you feel stuck. You want to do it, but you're just, and then you go into self-attack, and no matter what you do, you can't seem to get out of it. And you should be living better, but you just can't seem to break out of it. And it feels like people don't really understand what you're going through. And that triggers all these other things. So let's deal with that first. Let's deal with that emotional component where society kind of judges you and you feel kind of isolated. Oh, okay, you eat during that, right? Okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's dig into that emotional response. So things like that are very, that right away digs deep, right? And so you kind of mentioned that, and I've studied a lot of like Stanislavski, Meisner because of that, to be able to try and tap in. I think anyone who wants to learn great copy, I highly, highly recommend getting every book on Actor's method you possibly can and trying to act out your avatar. And you realize it's very difficult actually at first, because it's very incongruent. We're too smart for it, which is why, I love the entrepreneurship space now, because you can work with people that, are multimillionaires and kind of relate to that. And there's a lot of commonalities, et cetera. So I filtered my clients, but in the beginning, I definitely had to do some really, really interesting offers. Or, Pickup is a great example of a guy who has social anxiety and can't go talk to a girl. Well, we've all broken through that. We've broken through those walls. And a part of us, guess what? A big part of us doesn't want to go back. It's terrified to go back there because we fought so hard to get out of that pit. And we've had to destroy parts of ourselves. That part that's supposed to make that copy work, we've actually had to destroy it and shatter it into dust and let it float off into the wind. And we said goodbye, I never want to see you again. And now it's like a familiar scent that comes back, and it kind of terrifies us, I think, very viscerally, because if it's something we ourselves have gotten over, we're terrified that if we rewire our brain, we'll end up there again. So that's a very tough thing to deal with if you don't compartmentalize it properly. So just wanted to comment on that.
Nice. Yeah, I love it. I have so many different areas we could go with. They're like giant topics. So I kind of try to think what we could do kind of tight. I guess like one thing that I would love to hear where you're thinking, it's so cool. I'm truly to the point now where you talked about before, like, oh, the longer the better. Everyone has to kind of make that paradigm shift. Like, what? Like, no, that's not true. Like, oh, people are going to get, so we won't even go in there. I think another one too is like, ugly versus, beautiful for landing pages and stuff like that. It's cool how like you can just always go back to the beginning, and just as long as you think, okay, what is specific to the platform? And I've noticed lately, like there's a lot of stuff going back to like the Claude Hopkins shit, in a way, seeing how I personally believe that Instagram is moving more back towards the newspaper almost. And so being specific to the platform to where you really like, because it's kind of, the marketers haven't exploited it yet. You can really get into that sort of like, you're like, he's the people that can't see him yet. He's like, yes, the evil scientist over there. There's definitely been some who have, right? But I think like there's an opportunity again to kind of, go like, okay, how can I get as camouflage into the medium as possible? Mm-hmm. Yet still never forgetting that the principles never change and stuff like that, right? So I'd love to know what you've seen moving from, that old VSL where it's just the PowerPoint, and like I said, some of even these things come full circle, where I think a couple of years ago it was pretty played out and now it's kind of back. Same thing with like the long sales page, et cetera, et cetera. Is there anything you've noticed over the last sort of year and moving forward to the next year or two that you see is going to, I guess we're moving into design and formatting here, or platform specificity?
Definitely. So First, I'm going to go, again, I love going macro first because I think once you have the lay of the land, you can really understand where you are in the battlefield, so to speak. So before we get into the platform thing, let's talk trends, let's talk time trends. So to understand this, people have to understand that Google and Facebook run the majority of traffic. That's just the truth. And Google and Facebook are two giant companies, and they operate under certain principles with certain rule sets, and they have a certain monetization model. It's very, very, very important to understand, because if you fail to understand that, you can't market in the current climate at all. You're totally screwed. Now, once that happens, okay, let's look at timeline. Well, you didn't have the internet. Like, there was a point where, like, you remember flip phones, dude? Like we didn't have like these touch phones, right? Like what the heck? What the heck's gone? What the heck's happened, right? So we didn't have the internet, and then we didn't have social media platforms at all, and then we didn't have Google at all or YouTube at all, and now all these things very, very recently. I think for a lot of people, they're like, YouTube's oversaturated, all this stuff. No. Internet's a baby. The internet's a little baby. It's going to grow massive. You have billions of people getting access to, both monetary and communication that they've never had access to, especially in India, China, in massive quantities. The market's going to get flooded. It's the best time that it's ever been to be in this market. But what they have to understand from a marketing standpoint, trend-wise, is it's kind of like you just gave a bunch of weapons to a bunch of high school children, right? So the internet, if you were to rewind back, let's say 5 years for the sake of just putting a number on it, it kind of hovers 5 to 7 years. I'd literally view it as giving a bunch of children just a bunch of bazookas, and like just saying like, hey, just try not to push the big red one. You can push everything else. Just try not to push the big red one. And of course, what does every kid do? They go and they push the big red one. Everything goes haywire. Now, what do I mean by that exactly? What I mean by that is when the internet came out, there was very little regulation. And so people were able to make outrageous offers, just completely bonkers offers with no repercussion and no regulation and no downside whatsoever. They were able to capture huge amounts of revenue and funding and actually not even fulfill if they didn't want to fulfill. And there was no legal recourse for that.
And they couldn't, cancel credit cards. They got it redirected to Bangalore, and you got to cancel your credit card just to get rid of the subscription. Super tough, right? So why is the Google and Facebook example important? Well, because at that point, Google said, okay, well, we can't have this because we can't sell advertising if people are losing all their money and they're getting scammed. And so if you go back to, let's say, around the Panda update, for those of you guys that want to get hyper technical, there's an update that Google released where they really changed the way that their algorithm works with respect to certain niches, certain keywords, certain targeting. And they said, look, we gotta dial this back. And since then, they've been continuously dialing back this algorithm to make it less capable for people that are in the internet marketing space to just blatantly just run away with people's money. And I think that's great. I think that's awesome. So what does that trigger psychologically in the audience? Well, psychologically, it's a very simple example. Like if somebody rips you off, I want to be able to punch them in the face. Like as a human, if somebody steals money from me, I want to be able to chase them down and punch them in the face. So that's why what you're seeing now is look at the top quote unquote influencers that you see. You got Gary Vee, you got Tai Lopez, you got Tony Robbins, all people with a face, and it's called the personal brand. And well, why did that trend happen? I think a lot of people totally overlooked this. That trend happened because there was so much distrust in the marketplace that people by default, without even being fully aware of it, but subconsciously gravitated towards a personal brand because they can hold somebody accountable, right? If Gary Vee goes and embezzles money from these people, they're going to find Gary. Gary's not going to be able to walk around New York. If Casey Neistat goes and does some crazy stuff, like Casey can't film vlogs anymore. So that's why all of these bloggers came out, Viners came out, influencers came out, and that's the current trend that we're in. Okay, so that's the phase we're in. I feel that we're about 30 to 40% of the way through that trend, maybe even 20, 30. We're actually not at the tail end quite yet. I think a lot of people think we are. No, just look at the amount of Amazon FBA gurus coming out. I mean, you name an industry, stock trading, wealth management, it's a baby of an industry. So not enough people have the tools to build massive empires yet. And that's very, very prevalent by how few people you can actually name, right? You can like count the people that are really dominating, like Russell Brunson. How is it that Russell Brunson was able to build a massive tech company, massive just off being a great marketer? Is because he had further advantage. He's a phenomenal copywriter. He was able to get velocity on that. So you asked where are we going now, and then I'll get into platform specific because this all ties together. So we're in this personal rapport space now. I believe that the space we're going to go from here is the following.
I believe that we're going to see a lot of AI, a lot of automation, a lot of machine learning. And we're already seeing that. And I believe it's going to get just proliferated everywhere. And over the next 10 to 20 years, say, so we can talk shorter term in a sec, but over the next, let's say 10 to 20, everything that is not core human is going to become completely subsidized and borderline useless. So a good example is automation campaigns. I think automations within 10 years will be auto split tested, and we won't necessarily need to worry too much about the perfect automation campaign.
People that like email automation and stuff like that. Yeah,
exactly. Email automation, or even, for example, the perfect copy for swipe. That's already AI. Perfect web page layout. There's already AI companies coming out. Auto optimizing on the fly. I believe we're just going to see that take over everything that used to be a quote unquote core marketing function. I think that's all going to get replaced. And the only thing that's going to be left, and again, this might end up being further in the future, but my true belief is the only thing that's going to be left is this quote unquote human element of what is this thing that we can't replicate with technology, and how do you use that in marketing? And that's really, for me, the most visceral question is, what is it emotion? I don't think it's just emotion. There's more than that. There's legacy in there. There's brain synapses in there. There's these really odd needs, desires, and quirks too. I think a lot of marketers forget to factor in quirks. Like it's a weird word, but we all have these weird quirks. Like I'm OCD. Like why does no one market to my OCD-ness? Like why do so few people market to my OCD-ness? Like just tell me, hey, this thing will be at perfect angles and the colors will match everything else. I'm like, don't take my money. Take it. Take all of it. Take all my money. Just make it match. Make it work. Make it functional. Right. So it's like I've got a whole room of Apple products. Like I have like 7 iMacs in a row because like they're all the same size and they all line up and they all have the same keyboard and mouse. And like I love that. But that's a weird quirk, and that's a human element. That component is not something that you can really manifest through AI, at least not yet. Maybe in 100, 200 years, we'll be in a different position. So that I believe is where we're heading marketing wise. Is the more that you can stop worrying about the specific thing in the copy or this other thing, and start really asking like, what is the human element of my product or service, of this offer, and everything else relates off of that. So that part's easy. Like, what's the human element? This podcast has a certain human element to it, right? Like our conversation has a certain human element. You can't recreate that with robots. The back and forth that we have, the way that your neurons fire, the way that my neurons fire, the way that the listeners' neurons fire, including everything that they have currently going on in their environment as they're listening to this, that's not replicatable, at least from what I can tell currently. So that's really cool. That means we got something special here, right? So that's really powerful. So medium-wise, then I ask, okay, well, neurologically, what is the experience that the person's having? So off of that human element, what is the experience that they're having on that platform, right? Twitter, okay, they're looking for short, sweet conversations to get a dopamine spike, right? It relates to how can you get the dopamine spike? And platforms are built around dopamine, specifically by software developers, right? Instagram, likes, comments, engagement. Okay, well, what's the dopamine trigger? And how can I connect my brand or service to that dopamine trigger as viscerally, and that's the word, visceral, as viscerally and primally as possible? How can I bypass all logical thought and just make them crave it to such a point that they can't live without it? And then from there, okay, well, let's talk very quickly about the actual question you asked, so I don't pull a full roundabout on you. So IG, first and foremost, again, currently driven by personal brands. That's going to get played out eventually. And then we're going to be looking at what I call human element marketing. So that's going to be marketing towards an emotion rather than towards a person. So you're actually going to be getting bought into something else. And I don't think we fully even comprehend what that's going to be. It's going to be very close to what we have with the RSD stuff as a movement. Really, we market to this feeling of being kind of pathetic. And that, like, what is that? Yeah, that's attached to an individual right now. That's attached to a certain thing. But eventually that's going to have its own entity within the marketplace, and that it's going to sell itself. I know it's very, very macro, but that's where Instagram's going. Very basic stuff. Short videos with text works great. Most people, 50% watch on their phones without sound. So make sure you account for that. Make sure your images are stunning. Make sure you have a posting schedule. And Instagram is one of those platforms that's very numbers based. Everyone's like, how many followers do you have? And I've actually taken a reverse strategy recently. I've started to delete people that are following me very proactively. because I actually don't want them following me, because the way the algo works is it pushes it out to a small percentage. Depending on the engagement from that percentage, it pushes on further and further and further. So if someone's last post was August of this last year and they haven't posted in 5-6 months, my hypothesis is they're not even checking it. So I'll check for, has this person posted a story? Okay, if they haven't posted a story, their last post is over 3 months, and it doesn't look like they're hyper engaged with anything, I just get rid of them as a follower. Actually, I actually do a follower cleanse, like very similar to what we would do with an email cleanse, right? Back in the day, we would do
I was just gonna say, like you kind of, list hygiene, but doing it on your Instagram.
Exactly. And I'm noticing some really interesting things with clients on that, and I'm doing mine now. So it will be fascinating to see. My follower count will go down, but I think it will spike back up after. But
yeah, I heard about that. Actually, well, it's kind of a funny story. Somebody was telling me there's a couple apps. So I'd love to know if you use an app or anything, or just have a VA do it, or
I have multiple VAs do it.
Okay, because when I did the app, all of a sudden I had the white screen of doom, and I literally thought I deleted my Instagram.
Oh no!
It's because it for 5 hours, because it was pinging so fast to all the people. Then I'm like, I literally just blew up my Instagram here. So the VAs to do this.
I'm a huge fan of things that make life easier, but just for the sake of the listeners, understand that these platforms really don't like third parties. They really don't like it, and that's why I use VAs, because I haven't found an app that can do what the level of analysis that I need done. Because, for example, sometimes you'll have a guy who has a bio that says entrepreneur, and then he got like 3 posts, not a lot of followers, and he maybe hasn't liked my thing recently. But you know what? If I like his stuff, like he's following me, but he hasn't liked recently, and he hasn't posted recently. But you know what? I'll go and I'll notice he has a story on there. I'm going to his story. It's like, this is a real human. I'll comment on a story, and all of a sudden he's liking all my stuff. And from what I've seen, the apps aren't that smart. They're not sophisticated enough to be able to catch up on that nuance. Well, guess what? I've had a person like that hand me, $2,500 for a mentoring program recently. So that's cash. If we're going to go cash in pocket here, I would recommend getting VAs, pay them as little as possible, or even better, interns. The way I do internships is 3 months unpaid. Then you can qualify for another 3 months unpaid. After 6 months, you can qualify to get paid. I find that much better than a 3-month runway. And just as a quick little aside there. Yeah, VAs, I break down SOPs in video format. I hand that off to them. I have them replicate it. I have them show me their results. I have them track it in a spreadsheet. I do that for dating as well. I have VAs that full-time message potential leads. And
there's your OCD kicking in here, yeah.
Totally. No, I have spreadsheets upon spreadsheets with just lists of Instagram profiles of hot girls. I don't know if that's outside of the scope of this podcast, but I do do that. Yeah.
So I'd love to know a couple specifics for your Instagram hygiene. Who's somebody you're going to definitely cut out?
Sure. So I go to my followers and I look through, and I literally go profile by profile. So, picture yourself, you click on a profile and 0 posts, obviously cut out. That's a no-brainer. Then let's say some posts, but the latest post is over 3 months. If there's no story, cut out. If there is a story, I see if it's relevant or if it's some nonsense. And then I usually cut out. I obviously take a closer look at anyone with over about 5 to 10K followers. I take a closer look. But what I find is a lot of those followers are bought anyway because they haven't done this process. Now, you'll get into some gray area from here, right? So say you go to somebody's profile. Let's say you have 20 posts, and the last post was a month ago, and they haven't engaged. So what I would do is I combine cleansing with engagement. A guy like that who let's say he says, like young entrepreneur, and I can tell this kid's 17. What I'll do is I won't delete that kid, because that kid, by the time he's 22, will have had another 5 years to get indoctrinated on my content if I can get him to watch my content. So what I do, obviously, like all the photos, I leave a comment. My recommendation on comments as of currently is make it 4 words or more without emojis counting towards that count. So 4 words or more, and then, add emojis if you want, but I'd make it, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Make it a decent phrase, make it relevant. And then I also like, if anybody who has a story that as I scan, I always send them a message about the story. Even if they're eating a piece of ice cream, I go, man, that ice cream looks freaking delicious. Where is this place that you're in? And about 80% of the time I get a response, to be honest, even if it's people that are I've never talked to before, never met before. And so then you get into, who do I whitelist? Well, anyone I follow, I obviously whitelist. Anyone who is related to my niche, I whitelist. Now, sometimes I'll kick people that are not engaged, but still have a good following. So my account used to be a music account. and I switched it to self-development and entrepreneurship. So I'll have some pretty decent musicians on there to follow me. And I'll just kind of take a look and ask myself, like, is this person ever going to buy from me? And I guess that's at the core of the question is this person ever going to buy from me? Or is their authority somehow advantageous to have for my account? AKA, like, if Miley Cyrus follows you, probably don't get rid of her because that's going to screw your algorithm up. They're looking at stuff like that. But that's the general way that I scan it. And then I just have my VAs go through it. If they have a question, they say, hey, I ran into this profile. What do you think? And I find there's the great article of 1,000 true fans. For those of you that know, or if you don't know, highly recommend. Just Google 1,000 true fans. You'll find it. And I've really started taking that approach much more than let me get to 100K, 200K, a million, etc. I'd much rather have 25K that I know that when I drop that post, 90% of those people are going to engage on it because it's going to help my future growth, rather than have 100K of which that same 25K are going to be the ones to engage, and hence it's a far lower percentage. It just game the algo. The big thing for those that are marketers that are listening, game the algorithm. It's a game. It's formulaic and it can be manipulated.
Awesome.
Totally.
Love it. Got some new SOPs there that I'm about to send off to my team. So this is perfect. I guess, just final thing, like where would be the best place for people to hear more from you and reach out to you?
Sure. So the easiest place to find me is on IG, Instagram. Find me at MVKBIZ. That's M like Mary, V like Victor, K like Kangaroo, B like Bob, I like Icarus, Z like Zebra, MVKBIZ, gmail.com if you need to email me, or on IG for the IG handle. Feel free to DM, like my photos, follow me. I will try and not kick you off my followers list. I think
follow consistently, right? Yeah.
Make sure to follow consistently and like and engage. Yeah. I think it's really funny that that's like the qualification method we're in now. Like, no. Like, I want to. It's like those coaches that are like, show me why you're a good client for me. It's like, no, show me why you're a good follower. It's very like, it's very cultish. That's the best place to get a hold of me. I mean, I've got a host of other projects that I'm doing, but those will all be promoted through that channel anyway. So I think a single contact point, just go to Instagram, MVKBIZ, find me, like me, and we'll hug it out.
There we go. Yeah. Thanks for coming on, man.
Dude, of course, brother. Thanks for having me. Pleasure. And for those of you guys that listen this long, just remember life is short. So go do some shit that you enjoy for yourself. You don't owe anybody any. So just have fun.